Well, in the great spirit of Burning Man and the experience of illusionism, welcome to the Golden Gate Bridge, which somehow is multiplied. And we don't know quite how it's done it, but maybe it's sexual. Burning Man's very sexual, and maybe something happened with the Golden Gate Bridge, and it doubled itself. And having two of them isn't so bad. It's probably going to reduce traffic congestion. So anyway, it's my great pleasure to present Dave Rabin, who's a psychiatrist and has been working with me with clinical medicine around ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, and is a neuroscientist as well, exploring all kinds of interesting things, which I will let him give you some information about. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you so much for having me, Phil. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to be with you today. In addition to working with you in clinical practice with ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, I'm also been studying chronic stress and resilience for about 15 years or so. I'm also an MDMA trained psychotherapist with MAPS, and I'm working with MAPS on a study of the epigenetic mechanism of psychedelic medicines, focused currently on MDMA, but gradually expanding out to other psychedelic modalities and also non-psychedelic modalities, really looking at how the mechanisms of altered states of consciousness and how they promote healing. And I'm also the co-founder and chief innovation officer of Apollo Neuroscience, which is a product that we developed at the University of Pittsburgh to help induce balance in the autonomic nervous system to help us cope and adapt to stress more effectively. And I'm also the executive director of the Board of Medicine, of which we are both a part of, which helps disseminate harm reduction techniques and improve health and well-being to physicians and caregivers and patients alike. Today we're going to talk about, and I'm very excited to talk about, a technique that I think you probably were one of the first people in the world to start doing, which is what I would call teleketamine-assisted psychotherapy, or virtual ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. How did you start? What led you to start doing, if you don't mind me starting with here, to start doing this remotely?
Well, now you've already switched. You're interviewing me. No wonder the Golden Gate Bridge is confused. So I was early interested in the effects of ketamine in a psychedelic sense, in a deep psychedelic sense. And then we learned, as things went along at the GRIA conference, from Stephen Hyde, who wrote the second book, Ketamine for Depression, in the literature, and in practices in Tasmania, that he had been doing at-home sessions with his patient population with no problems, and supporting them in very important ways and giving limited prescriptions through his formulating pharmacy. And that those low dose, what we've come to call trance sessions, were very productive in terms of treating depression, trauma, etc. So we began to explore that. Initially, I was highly distrustful, and I think most of the interviews we've done with people working with ketamine in this thing we're producing have emphasized more and more the importance of the psychedelic aspect in treatment, whether it's of addiction or of mental disorders. So recognizing that, and recognizing the problems with access to care, which is a lot of what you and I will discuss in terms of how do we make this available to people at reasonable cost. And given that we could train people in the office truly well, developing a sense of their sensitivities, their responsivities, how long it would take, whether they got nauseated or not, the principal side effect, that we could, based on that office practice, develop a schema for them being their own agent at home with our support, and providing, because we're always concerned about misuse, providing very limited prescriptions entirely under our control. And we've been doing that now with hundreds and hundreds of people, thousands of sessions, and we haven't had any misuse. So in that sense, we practice telepsychiatry. And not to take the whole show away from you, but we've also, because of COVID 19, been resorting to doing sessions on Zoom with people at home, first time sessions. We haven't done very many, but to enable some people to do the work of depression and trauma remotely, given the risks of coming into the office. And we have a protocol we've sent out as far and wide as we can of how to do that with standard of care ethically. And the main problem is there aren't enough people practicing ketamine assisted psychotherapy. And not that many people yet have gotten into doing the work at home. So that's one reason why we've moved to Indra's Neck Coalition and things like it to help with trauma in different ways. But that's the essence of how we conducted it. We don't charge for the at-home sessions, so people are saving a huge amount of money rather than coming in for 6 sessions, analogously for the intravenous kind of delivery of ketamine. Enough said.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so well said and so exciting because, you know, access to care, not just with psychedelic medicine, but in general in mental health has been such a problem. Even, you know, it's a different problem for people who live in major cities and people who live outside of cities, and in rural areas. But I think in general, it's just been hard to get access to high quality mental health care that is really trauma informed care, where we're really addressing, you know, the root of the issue rather than treating symptoms, which I think ketamine assisted psychotherapy and the protocol that we use is so important because, as you were saying earlier, there's a very interesting advantage to teleketamine medicine. It in some ways very much embodies the ethos of ketamine assisted psychotherapy in that it empowers the independent healer in our clients and our patients by teaching them how to use the medicine on their own at home as the priority, so that they can actually become, you know, really truly independent agents of their own healing, which is so exciting as mental health providers to finally have treatments and a treatment protocol that really encourages people to heal themselves.
I agree. So what do you think? What do you think some of the issues in establishing a standard of care for telepsychiatry with ketamine are? How do you view that? I mean, because there are, you know, people we've been very critical of, who I call K-Light, who are in it for the money, and who have very minimalist kind of programs, and are distributing, you know, they took from us the lozenge ideas, and they're distributing lozenges to people with very minimal supervision. And, you know, it's a powerful psychedelic. You take enough of it, you may well hit what people call the K-hole. You may have a period of true ego dissolution. And even at lesser dosages, the experiences can be very powerful. And, you know, we have a lot of concern about disseminating this without proper support. What's your view of some of the risks?
I mean, that's such an important question, I think, for that we're all, you know, really trying to tackle throughout all of psychedelic medicine, whether it's with MDMA or psilocybin. Ketamine, I think, is particularly uniquely situated for this discussion because it is legal in every state. It's legal in almost every country. We're able to actually deliver it to people's homes. Mind Bloom is one example in New York City that's been getting a lot of press for delivering ketamine to people's homes without necessarily as much supervision as we would like to see. And I think there's, you know, other groups that are doing this as well. But I think the most famous example is actually not from at-home use. It's from IV ketamine treatment centers where there's very little, if any, preparation and integration or psychotherapy at all. It's really just stick the needle in the arm, administer the medicine without any context, and then hope that something happens. And, you know, thank goodness ketamine is such a powerful medicine. In it actually, you know, many people still has antidepressant effects that we're starting to learn and understand. But we also know that without psychiatric, or I should say psychotherapy inclusion in the protocol, that it does put people at risk. And I think, you know, these psychedelic medicines, to include ketamine, are so powerful. They also come with great responsibility in terms of the way that we use them. It's so important as the care providers to understand that responsibility, and that this is not about a treatment that makes money as quickly as possible. It's a treatment that heals people. And if we risk the trust in the relationship between the healer and the person being healed, then we risk the entire practice of healing in and of itself, because healing has to be founded in a trusting relationship. So if we're giving people experiences, for example, and I think the IV situation is particularly interesting because, Mind Bloom is just one of, there's not many people doing teleketamine therapy right now. Mind Bloom is one group. Field Trip is another group. That these groups may not be following all the protocols that we would like to see followed to maximize safety. However, there are other groups that 80%, for instance, or 80% plus, I think, of ketamine providers are IV ketamine providers that are not including psychotherapy as part of their experience. And
nor do they really have a sense of what it's even about for themselves, hence our training to expose people. But there's another side to it, which is an ethical side for us who know the power of the medicine. And that is, we can't reach everybody. There are
Right.
people, the distribution of psychiatrists is poor. The cost of psychiatric care is high. The pharma orientation is strong. The cost of psychedelic psychotherapy, even in the Mind Bloom hands, when you really look at the costs, they're not negligible. They're quite
Sure.
steep when you look at the IV.
Over time.
Yeah, they're steep over time. So on the one hand, the speaking to the issue of distribution of a medicine that has great possibilities for helping people, yet needs to be really well monitored, and making it available at low cost so that people can afford it when we don't have insurance mechanisms. Those seem to me as imperatives for us to work with in some way or other. The other problem being that when you do psychedelic medicine, you're creating nests and you're creating settings in which the probability of a good outcome, the probability of an experience and an integration of what that experience is, that probability you want to make really high. And doing it remotely requires a dedication, it requires time, it requires energy. It's not like just sending something out, some powerful psychedelic. I mean, people have done that all along, right? People send LSD out through the dark web, or any of the medicines have passed out in huge numbers to people, not always safely. But we're not doing the dark web. We're doing psychotherapy in a very thoughtful way. So what do you think about all that? Because it is a difficult dilemma.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think it's something that, we are constantly trying to address and come up with new methods for addressing this, while making sure that we're firmly rooted in our priorities of patient safety. I think that all of this work that we do as clinicians, when we think about what we do, we took a Hippocratic oath, right? And that Hippocratic oath guides the way that we deliver treatment. I think access to care is critical. We have to be always thinking about, how do we improve access to care? How do we train more people to be able to deliver this treatment effectively? How do we create this structure to be able to not only train more people, but to scale it by making sure that perhaps maybe the psychiatrist or the physician who has the highest pay grade on the table in terms of who we're talking about, maybe is not the primary person required to be present the whole time. Perhaps it's a combination of psychotherapists that have a lower pay level to make it more affordable for the patients or the clients, and then having a psychiatrist present for parts of the visit, right?
Well, we have in our favor that ketamine's truly a safe medicine, but we do also know that it has problems of high blood pressure that's transient, of vomiting for some people that doesn't stop. But I think that's true if we have highly trained people who are not MDs themselves, but are working closely. It's a Schedule III substance, has to be prescribed and oversighted. We have that, and we have collectives of people supporting each other in the wisdom gathering of how to work with this. I think that's a program. And I mean, I think that's where our training is going.
Absolutely.
Not just to do, telepsychiatry, but to enable people to really do this thoughtfully and in a developed kind of methodology that's really focused around this particular molecule and what it could do as we build the toolbox waiting for MDMA and waiting for psilocybin mushrooms to be available as well. So I think that training, and creating groups of people working together is the spirit that will enable dissemination. I don't think flinging it out is going to do
Right.
anything but cause harm.
Well, I agree with you, and I think again, going back to what you just said, we know this is not a new thing, but when we rush into anything, that's when we make the biggest mistakes. It's the same thing that happened in the 60s and 70s with the release, the impatient release of LSD from academia into the wild, before we really understood how powerful this medicine was and that it could be misused, and that a lot of these medicines are incredibly powerful amplifiers, but they're not necessarily specific amplifiers of positive experiences. They can also amplify negative experiences if used improperly. They do have the possibility to be abused. They do have the possibility to cause, unfortunately, but also something that is important to understand how to respectfully use the medicines, is that they can cause re-traumatization. And I think why I respect the ketamine assisted psychotherapy protocol so much, and what MAPS has done with MDMA, is because these protocols really focus on patient safety first and making sure that we absolutely minimize any risk of re-traumatization from these experiences. And I think it's, I'm proud to say that from everything that I've read and having worked with you and everything that I've read with respect to MAPS administration of MDMA, as well as your administration of ketamine, that you don't have those kinds of side effects with your clients. And that's really incredible. Whereas in the recreational setting, we do see that occasionally. And one of my specialties in my practice, actually, prior to us working together, is helping bring people back from unpleasant, uncomfortable, or bad trips that they've had recreationally, which they feel have caused a long-term negative effect on their sense of selves, their consciousness, or their mental or physical health. And so,
Glad to hear that. We did start. Graf started a thing called Spiritual Emergency Network back in the 70s, late 70s, and I was part of it as it really began to handle bad trips and difficulties that arose in some of the group functions that he and others were doing and occur. They do occur. They occur in our groups.
right.
And the other part of it, which I think is really important, is that we're talking about overall psychiatric evaluation, psychiatric care, and the ketamine is not a standalone drug. It doesn't do everything for everyone. It doesn't treat everything, and it's not a panacea. It's a medicine which is embedded in a psychotherapy, can be useful, but we need to be able to really look at whole people. And part of the cheap it out kind of thing is not to really look at whole people and their needs, and to provide oversight of psychiatric, psychotherapeutic care, which is a necessity. I mean, people are complicated. They're not
Absolutely.
just, I have treatment-resistant depression. I have TRD. I'm going to come to you. I'm going to take 6 hits of ketamine over this next 2 weeks, and I'm going to become human again and love my life and love my wife, and I'll be whole. I wish that were true, but we don't see that. We see some of that. We do see miracles. I mean, one of the beauties of this work, as you've come to know, is that we have miraculous experiences that transcend, conventional work that we may have done for years with people. We have a lot of people coming in who have been treated over time by conventional means. Same therapist who is now doing, or she is now doing ketamine work, and they have these amazing changes and breakthroughs that they've been struggling to get to through conventional means. So there's a whole new methodology coming out that I know you and I want to both develop and make available.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of my favorite analogies of what you just said, because I believe that, our brains work so much in metaphor in terms of learning, and the idea that, you could have the best tools in the world, and if you give them to the worst mechanic in the world, he's still going to break your car. You're not, just because the mechanic has the best tools available, if he doesn't know, or she doesn't know how to use them, you can still cause great damage. And I think we often forget about that.
You got to buy an electric vehicle because you don't have any maintenance.
And again, but like also to that point, right? We are not machines. We are not robots. We have, through the ancient practice of healing and medicine, learned to characterize how the body works, how the mind works, how the spirit works, and how to understand how to, you know, help facilitate a smooth operation between all of these different parts of our experience, ideally as one entity, right? As one experience where it's not just mind, body, and spirit working separately. It's all working together as the whole person in coherence and harmony with the environment, you know, as one thing. And when we start to focus or lose sight of those unifying principles of healing, then that is oftentimes what causes this division of ourselves, or between ourselves and the sense of the other, that can cause great damage to us. And I think that, you know, there's so much we could talk about here, but the education that is even being taught to medical school students right now. I went to medical school a lot more recently than you did. I finished my psychiatry residency a lot more recently than you did. And I can tell you, when I finished my psychiatry residency.
Toot your own horn.
Well, I know I'm not. I'm only saying that.
Not having a geriatric, an anti-geriatric agenda.
I just think it gives you even more credit that you came to the conclusions that you did when we knew so little about how these things worked in mental health. And mental health was like, you know, significantly more stigmatized in your medical school training and in your residency training than it was for me. And yet in my training, we still did not learn about the things that have all the developments that have come about since that time.
I think you entered the pharma age, and one of the things you've been doing brilliantly is to try and make it into a neuroscientific as well as a psychotherapeutic age. But I think we've covered the turf. Do you feel okay if we come to a conclusion? I have a wicked thing to propose to you.
Sure.
Okay, you ready?
Ready.
New form of telepsychiatry, okay? You walk out to the middle of your span, I'll walk out to the middle of my span, and we'll play catch. I'm going to throw a ball to you, and we're going to play catch across the Golden Gate bridges that we've invented, okay? This is Burning Man.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay, I'll meet you at the middle, and thank you for doing this with me.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, Phil.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Take good care.
You too.